Welcome back, everybody. We're starting our afternoon session now. And our first speaker is Dr. Kofi Boa. Dr. Kofi Boa is an agronomist. He's the founder and director of the Howard G. Buffett Foundation Center for No-Till Agriculture in Ghana. His parents were smallholder farmers in Ghana. At age 12, his mother's cocoa farm got burned by a bushfire, and life became very tough for his family. That bitter life experience at a young age got him to develop a strong hatred for fire on the farmland, and he vowed to fight the slash and burn method of land preparation for the rest of his life. He soon became aware of a system called PROCA, which we can define as no-till agriculture with mulch, which he modified to reduce the waiting time between clearing the fields and planting the crops. He has been farming this way from that time until today. And this is what has brought him so far in championing the development and promotion of smallholder agroecological farming. His talk today is entitled African Eco-Philosophy and its contribution to climate change and environmental conservation solutions. Dr. Boa.
Thank you. African eco-philosophy and its contribution to climate change and environmental conservation solutions. I'm Kofi Boa from the Center for No-Till Agriculture, Ghana in West Africa. African eco-philosophy. We see African eco-philosophy as a critical lab of the wisdom of the African and the respect of the African culture that has to do with the ecology and the environment. And this pays heavy recognition for the interconnectedness of human beings with the natural environment and its component parts. That is everything that there is within the environment, the rivers, the plants, the animals, the mountains, and all that. And so here, it embraces the fact that Africans have often lived in peace and harmony with nature, with the realization that the environment is key to life. And more importantly, the African sees everything in the environment as possessing intrinsic value. And therefore, the African environmental philosophy is basically ecocentric. But then, looking at the current state of the African philosophy, what emerges is that Africans for millennia have had unique ways of dealing with situations, especially those that have to do with climate and the environment. But the unfortunate aspect and the things that are coming out as a result of modernization, more especially influenced by Christianity, which has swept across every aspect of our lives in Africa, to the extent that a lot of our thinking and the way we do things have been labeled as outdated and unworthy of modern status. So this is how far we have come. Our beliefs and cultures have been marred by modernization to such an extent that we are now experiencing serious crisis coming as a result of our neglect of the values of the African culture. This has brought a lot of consequences to us. More importantly, the problems of the environment. And so in the present day time, Africa is facing a whole lot of environmental problems. And a lot of these have come as a result of our neglect for our cultural values, as we are going to see. There are a whole lot of these problems, and these include desertification, deforestation, drought, soil erosion, climate change, species endangerment, depletion of natural resources, among several others. But what one sees from all this is that there has been complete lack of respect for the order of the universe. The African believed in a whole lot of things. And our refusal to accept and to live with traditions have brought us to a point where we have assumed misguided powers to change several things in nature, more especially our beliefs and culture, to the extent that these listed problems and several others are now playing so hard on us in terms of us in our survival ethics. And so this is where the fear is, that if nothing is done, then environmental decimation is imminent. And when it happens, we as part of the entities within the environment will also not exist. And so the African has several beliefs and practices. And these beliefs and practices are what have preserved the ecology of Africa for several years till now, from the ancient times. We see that Africans have always related with nature. And we have had cultural practices and beliefs about the environment and the ecology. And these beliefs and practices about the environment and the ecology are the ones that have kept us alive in sustaining our lives till now. Africa has sustained its life from ancient times till now, guided by several of these beliefs and practices, which have a lot of implications on the environment and conservation, on the climate and environmental conservations. We're going to look at some of these practices and beliefs. And a few of them that come to mind easily are: one, the land. You know, Africans believe that we have inherited the land. It's a trust from the Creator, and more especially from the Creator and the ancestors. And that the African, because of the serious interconnectedness with nature, with the environment and all the key elements in the environment, believes that the land has to be followed after some years of cultivation. For what? So as to allow it to renew itself. And this is the wisdom, the philosophical thinking of the African. The land should not be exhausted completely, should not be killed. It has to sustain man's life. And in doing that, it has to, there's got to be a time where it has to rest. And therefore, following was an important aspect of the farming process. And that is why in those days, there was so much emphasis on shifting cultivation. And so shifting cultivation was used as a natural regenerative process to ensure that we are able to sustain the productivity of the land. But what we see these days is that, yes, shifting cultivation is no more feasible because of the increasing pressure on arable land coming as a result of increasing population pressure. But the wisdom of the African and ensuring that we are able to renew the lands, to get the lands to regenerate themselves, have shifted from the shifting cultivation to other aspects such as conservation agriculture, which enables the African, the farmers, to be able to work on the land, feed themselves, but at the same time, be so mindful about conservation to the point that one is able to stay on a given piece of land, farm it in a sustainable way, being so mindful about environmental stewardship, and intensively to understand that the few untouched portions or patches are then reserved for future generation. And so here, what one sees is that the African is not static, and the wisdom bestowed on the Africa ensures that at the point where one traditional practice is not valuable at any particular time, there is the need to then change to another system that is of value at the present day time. And therefore, the shift from shifting cultivation as a natural regenerative process to conservation agriculture as a regenerative process of the land. And in this way, we are able to keep the land productive. One unique thing you find in Africa are the sacred groves. Africa, the African believes that the spirits are there, and the spirits reside in certain places, and they also help to protect human beings. For that matter, there are several places in Africa, in most African villages and towns, there are several special reserves labeled as sacred groves. And these sacred groves have very much restricted entry so that we are able to preserve the plants and the animals within such reserves. And this brings us to preservation of biodiversity, which is so much needed in environmental conservation systems. So in these groves, with the trees, with the bush and tall trees moderating the environment, we are able, the system is able to modify itself to take care of the negative effect of climate change. And it is gratifying to note that in several African communities, in the evenings, late evenings, and in the night, when temperatures got so high, people will get out of their houses, walk towards about 10 to 20 meters from the sacred groves to cool themselves. This then shows that the sacred groves in reality were moderating the environment to such an extent that in the heat of the day, in the heat of the night, it was drawing people closer to feel the change in environment. There are several other things. In Africa, there are several different clans, groups of people sharing the same views, having a lot of things in common. And there are several of these clans scattered within communities. And each clan has a different totemic plant or animal. And these totemic plants and animals are very much revered. They are so respected because there is a belief that the spirits reside in all these plants and animals. And so within a clan, there is this aspect of the fact that there is mystical relationship or spiritual connection with the totems. And so they are never touched. it is an abomination to kill or damage a totemic plant or animal. And so if there are several clans within a community, and every clan has a totemic plant or animal that has to be preserved by the clan members within the clan, then it means that the pressure on the decimation of individual plants and animals is so much reduced, and therefore leading to the proliferation of several plants and animals within the communities. And this is coming as a result of the mystical relationship, the respect for the mystical relationship or the spiritual connection between human beings and these plants and animals. But what we have seen coming from the sacred groves, looking at the totems, is that modernization, more especially coming from Christianity, have gotten the African to believe that there is no relationship between the human being and the spirits, so to say, the spirits dwelling in the sacred groves, the spirits embedded in the plants and animals, in the totemic plants and animals, to such an extent that people have had cause to go into the groves, and they have not experienced any tragedy. People have killed totemic plants and animals, and no pain or whatever. No, they have not had any bad thing happening to them in the family. And therefore, there is a point, we've gotten to a point where the sacred groves are being encroached, and several places you don't find them anymore. There are places where you don't even talk about totemic plants and animals. And so this is the point where modernization is getting to a point where, for sure, we are getting rid of these beliefs. We are putting these beliefs aside, and therefore causing serious damage to the environment, losing on environmental conservation with serious consequences on climate change. African is noted to be a hunter, but one important thing about this activity is that hunting in all aspects is restricted to only the adult animals and birds. And this has a value in the sense that the young ones are forbidden to be touched, so as to keep the generation on and on and on. But then, this is another aspect of our life which is seriously downplayed these days, and therefore getting us into serious problems. There are several places in Africa where we have taboos. There are taboos all over. And one unique thing in the African setting is that within a week in several communities, one day is set aside where people are forbidden to go to the farmland. Not even to work, but forbidden completely to go to the farmland a day within the week. And the idea is that if one dare enter the farmland on this day, tragedy will befall that person, because that is a day set aside for the spirits to roam around and to have their peace. This was just brought into the minds of people just to get them to appreciate, because the African is touched with the spirits. And so, in order not to in order not to have problems with the spirits, you don't go there. But the real thing behind it was to create calm conditions for free movement of wildlife, especially in the very dry season in Africa. In several parts of Africa, the dry period is long, it's very much prolonged. And then wildlife roaming around then become a problem because they find it very difficult to find food. They find it very difficult to find water. And so on this particular day, which is coded as a day for the spirits, is actually a day to allow these wildlife, animals and things to move around freely and be able to gather food, to be able to water themselves. And once in the hard conditions of the heat of the season, the dry season, if the wildlife is able to access food, is able to water themselves for even short periods, it makes a lot of sense in their preservation, which is so much needed in conserving the environment. More importantly, Africans, we know, mostly are smallholder farmers out there in the villages. And it is on the farm that people fetch water to drink, people fetch water to do a whole lot of things. But most of these, especially in the dry periods, are springs that get finished within a very short time because of the low recharge capacity. But when a day like this is set aside, tied to the spirit so as to create fear for people to stay away, the springs get recharged so that on the day when people are not going there and the springs get completely recharged, the following days, when farmers are there on the field, they are able to get water for whatever they need. And more importantly, the springs, even getting one day to recharge fully, modifies the immediate environment. But then people have been made to understand that there is no spirit out there. And of course, there is no spirit, but then people have been made to forgo all this because it is tied to the spirits, and Christianity has nullified the value of the spirits. And so people have defied the taboo days, and every day is a work day. Springs are not recharging good enough, and more especially in the dry season, the prolonged dry season, we have the wildlife having problems. Cemeteries, very, very important. Cemeteries have been kept very bushy with shrubs and trees. And cemeteries have been labeled as home of the ghost. And because of the belief of the African, to the point that ghosts exist, people stay away from cemeteries. And cemetery is kept very scary because of the thick bush, the tall trees, and the shrubs under, making the place scary. And when it is time for burial, it is just a small path that is created, and that is created to enter the cemetery, and then people get in there to dig to bury with very minimal opening. So the cemeteries close to the communities also offered so much value in terms of environment, in terms of climate moderation, because the tall trees, and of course, cemeteries have very tall trees, and the tall trees moderate the environment so much. And the cemeteries are also laden with a whole lot of animals, wildlife, still conserving biodiversity. But what do we see these days? People have been made to appreciate the fact that there are no ghosts, and of course, that was a way of the ancestors getting people to stay away out of the cemetery to keep it in its entirety so as to modify the environment, so as to ensure the preservation of biodiversity in there. But then, when modernization has gotten us to believe that there is no ghost, people have encroached, and to the extent that now the cemeteries have gravel paths, they have cement paths, they have very well decorated tombs, and some of them even have tall, big, nicely built houses on the graves, to the extent that apart from the wreaths with these plastic flowers and things, you don't see anything apart from the graves, the tombs and things. And so the cemeteries close to the communities, which also added to the sacred groves and things in terms of environmental moderation, cooling the environment, preserving plants and animals, and therefore conserving the environment, the value has also been lost. So, for all these things happening, the African still believes in the interconnectedness with the spirits. And so, there are several instances where we have rituals, and these rituals are used to correct violation of nature's integrity and also to appease the spirits. Now, one unique thing about these rituals is that some of them are very scary and they become very expensive. And these have been put in place so as to scare people from violation of nature's integrity. And so if one doesn't have to spend so much to perform rituals, if one doesn't have to go through a whole lot of trouble to appease the spirits, then the best thing is to ensure that we have respect for the taboo days. We have respect for the totems. We have respect for the sacred groups, because if one goes against the norms, the ethics tied to these, one would definitely have to perform the rituals. And like I said, it becomes so much in terms of resources. And in some instances, people are completely even forbidden from entering the community again. And nobody will want to be sent out of his or her home just because of the violation of nature's integrity. And so put together, all these that we're talking about are things that have guided the African in preserving the ecology, in ensuring that we are able to conserve the environment, we are able to have the trees and things coming to such an extent that we are able naturally to hold climate change and to get the value of all these traditions, all these beliefs, and all these practices. So, our closing thoughts have been that the African beliefs in ideas, certainly had ecological implications. What we are getting from this short discussion is that the African beliefs and ideas certainly had ecological implications, because everything that we have spoken about, going from the value of the land in terms of ensuring that we are able to get it to rest and to recuperate, to regenerate itself, of which the shifting cultivation has become unfeasible, and in its place, Africa has embraced conservation agriculture, especially at the smallholder level. The sacred groups, totemic animals, or ensuring that we are able to keep the ecology in its entirety, ensuring that these processes then modify the microclimate to make life worth living for human beings and the other elements in nature, and at the same time be able to conserve whatever there is, preserve biodiversity, which is so much needed in environmental conservation. We also have learned that some aspects of modernization has caused the erosion of the positive climatic and environmental values of our eco-philosophy. For sure, from our short discussion, we're seeing that African eco-philosophy is very much ecocentric and has, in several aspects, guided and protected the African climate, the African environment. But from what we are seeing, the influence of modernization, more especially coming from Christianity, showing and proving that there are no spirits, there are no ghosts, totemic animals, plants don't matter, and one can easily move around in the sacred groups. The cemeteries becoming tourist attraction in terms of looking at how many beautiful tombs there are and making the area bare has eroded the positive climatic and environmental values of our eco-philosophy. So what is it that we take home? What we are getting out of all this and taking home is that the wealth of experiential wisdom of how Africans cared and protected the environment in the past should not be ignored in the name of modern environmental ethics. To such an extent that if we are able to preserve the sacred groves, if we are able to respect taboo days, we are able to respect totemic plants and animals, then all of this put together will help to protect the environment, will help to moderate the climate. But then, the very last thing then is that as we strive to protect the environment, and therefore we should not ignore our beliefs, practices, and traditions. In the name of modern environmental ethics, we also have to be very careful, as exemplified by the discussion related to the shifting cultivation and then replace the conservation agriculture replacing shifting cultivation in present day Africa. We say that it is useless and dangerous for us in Africa to struggle to maintain dysfunctional practices and beliefs just to preserve our culture. In other words, just the mere preservation of our culture should not tie us to beliefs and practices that are not of value in the present day Africa. Thank you. Hello?
Yeah, so I was just looking to see if any questions have come in. And it looks like we have no questions have come in. Do any of the speakers want to join the discussion and ask a question right now? Yeah, I'll turn it over to Veronica.
Thank you, Professor Hams. This is more of a comment, and it's something that I've, an issue that I've come across when I study, African traditional religions and in relation to human origins. And what I found out is that there's an irony where researchers, particularly Western researchers, call on African, traditions, and how we are connected to nature when we want to preserve wildlife. But when it comes to other aspects of the African culture, it's for the most time it's relegated to the dustbins of history, something that's not quite important in the modern day world, and that we have to follow all these scientific methods of doing things. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, fine. I mean, I share your sentiments. Mm-hmm. What is happening is that we have had, and even Africans, some African scholars, and especially, I mean, guided by, we keep talking about modernization, also think the same. But what we are saying, for me personally, somebody who has lived in a village, putting science, farmers' practices and tradition together to try to make a change, what we are saying is that we need to preserve the ecology, especially when it comes to environmental and ecological issues. We need to preserve the ecology. But then, modern science is playing a role. But what we have to understand is that we have had instances from the past where we were able to preserve the ecology. We were able to moderate the environment through adherence to our core values in terms of our beliefs, in terms of tradition, in terms of practices. And so, for me personally, we should pay a lot of respect to these elements, such that we put that together with the emerging science to be able to make a headway. And by that, we should be able to preserve our ecology, to moderate the environment, and ensure biodiversity. Because the way things are going now, environmental decimation is imminent if nothing is done. And so tying science together with tradition and ensuring, bringing people's mind to the fact that calamities can befall people if they violate nature's integrity, will also put a little bit of fear, so that things that are supposed, for instance, reserves, are respected as reserves, for them to be able to play the unique role in moderating the environment.
Thank you.
Let's see. Okay, I'll go to Paul.
Thank you very much, Professor Hams. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Boa. I also grew up in Ghana, and I grew up in a village. And I remember, being told that you cannot farm at the river banks because that is the sacred habitation of the gods, and you can't even go to the sacred forest. In fact, you dare not even touch certain trees without performing certain ritual. But I think that you talk about extensively in terms of the role education have played in terms of presenting such knowledge as myth and superstition. But I am also curious in terms of the way religion, and in particular Christianity and Muslim religion, have also played in fighting against some of the traditional belief system that has also support the way in which those narration was connected to eco-philosophy of African ways of life.
Yes, you're perfectly right. In fact, one key issue has been religion. I mean, talking about Christianity and then the Muslim religion, because this is where people have played it to the extent that there is a complete disconnect between the human being and the so perceived spirit. Actually, looking back, what one realizes is that these were ways of ensuring that people adhere to ethics to preserve the ecology. And so the Christians, the Muslims will be right in saying that there is nothing. And of course, people have gone in there, there have not been anything. And so they keep going. But just as you said, people not going close to the rivers, not farming along the river banks. I mean, there's so much value, but it was a way of getting people to stay out by putting some fear because of the fact that the African believes in those spirits. And so don't go there because the spirits reside there and tragedy will befall you. But seriously, all those things we were looking at, I mean, the bush, the thick vegetation, reducing, slowing down the speed of runoff so that we don't get siltation down into the river bodies to destroy the waterways and all those. But you're right, and I share that sentiment, and I always have this thing to say that, well, Christianity, fine, is good. Muslim religion is good. But then when it comes to downplaying the cultures, the practices, and the beliefs to such an extent that they don't become any more valuable in the preservation of the ecology, then it becomes unfortunate.
Okay, I've got some questions here. Let me read one from an anonymous attendee. What do you make of the commodification of the environment where we now have, quote, agricultural derivatives, unquote, thanks to the financialization of the environment?
Well, yeah. See, these are some of the issues that have to be tackled. And along the same lines, we are looking at people being paid for preservation of the lands. We are looking at people who are being paid for carbon credit. And if we should go deep into some of these things, what is it exactly that we expect to get from them? It is all a matter of ensuring that we are able to preserve the ecology. But when it becomes an issue that has to deal strictly with money, and then it is just like people going in there because of the financial implications, and therefore the value to some extent might be downplayed. But otherwise, ensuring that we are able to farm, we are able to work within the ecology in such a way that we become good stewardships, we do not endanger the systems, and even getting in the ecology and helping to do things like enrichment planting and all that will help. But then commodification is another issue that seriously should be looked into in terms of environmental preservation.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question here from Rose Jaji. I am just wondering, how is the idea of African eco-philosophy received in Ghana at the moment? Is there something like a national dialogue about it?
At the national level, what we see is that there are now activist groups of people that are seriously looking at this issue. And for sure, my center is playing a lead role in this, trying to get people to think alike in terms of African eco-philosophy being mainstreamed in our, more especially in our agricultural systems, and then also ensuring that we are able to work on the land, but then preserve it in a way that it is kept wholesome. At this point, there are few of us, some groups scattered around doing it and trying to come together to push for this. But at the national level, this is not something that has been taken up seriously. But the processes are in place. We are championing that cause, we're educating people, and we keep burden on in terms of the masses, people that understand and go for it, more especially at the smallholder farmer level. Because what has happened is that climate change is impacting so negatively on the vulnerable farmers, and they are the smallholder farmers. So they have been our targets, but unfortunately, smallholder farmers most of the time are voiceless. Their voices don't get anywhere. But as our hope is that as we continue to build the masses of smallholder farmers, we'll grow so much in numbers, and whether people like it or not, our voice will become very heavy and it will be heard. But at this point, we are just growing into it.
Okay, I've got two more questions here. One from the anonymous attendee who writes, you briefly mentioned smallholders. Do they follow indigenous cultivation techniques, or do they depend entirely on Western influenced farming knowledge?
Yes. Yeah, the smallholder farmers, for now, a lot of them have inherited. You see, as I was speaking, we got to a point where everything traditional was noted to be obsolete, and that people had to modernize, and smallholder farmers followed suit. But like I said, the time has come where smallholder farmers are realizing that there has been a mistake. They have been misguided. And at this point, several smallholder farmers are now coming back to the old systems of farming, which come in line with the cultures, with the beliefs. And so a lot of the slashing and burning, the clean land food preparation is stopped, and people are getting to appreciate the fact that we need to preserve life in the soil. We need to protect the environment. We need to stop the soils from being washed away because the nutrients are being washed. Irrespective whether when you apply the fertilizer, you don't get the value because the soils are naked. There is nothing to retain water, and without water in the soil, the fertilizer that you buy and apply is useless. And so all these things are getting the smallholder farmers to realize that the time has come to change. Unfortunately, some of us who have worked through the system, put together science, experience, and traditional knowledge, are supporting farmers with knowledge in this transitional period.
Okay, one final question comes from Teferi Abate. How would this traditional African eco-philosophy work in the face of increased demographic pressure and increased commercial pressure, both on the land and on economically valued resources on the land?
Yeah. See, this is very, very interesting. And what has happened is that one unique feature of the African agriculture is that it is mostly within the hands of the smallholder farmers. We have some commercial farms. We go to South Africa and other places, but the number of commercial farmers does not come anyway. And then put together, the acreage does not come anywhere. The big time farming does not come anywhere near the collective acreage of smallholder farming. And even at this commercial level, people are realizing the value for respect for the environment. And so now the problem we had with commercial farming was the fact that it's heavily relies on machinery, and that people thought that mechanization was just equal to the use of plows. But fortunately for us in Africa, and even at the smallholder farmer level, we have introduced eco-friendly conservation agriculture machinery. And this is what we have put ourselves together to show to both the smallholder farmers and to the big time farmers, to such an extent that commercial agriculture can still go on, but then we'll have respect for the environment to such an extent that we are getting people to appreciate the disasters associated with massive clean tilled preservation, getting people to appreciate the need for barriers, enrichment planting, tree preservation, even on the commercial fields, and having natural barriers within the thousands of hectares that farmers, commercial farmers operate. And by this, we believe that with time, we will get Africa to come back to itself in terms of being able to feed itself massively, but ensuring that we are mindful of environmental stewardship.
Dr. Boa, thank you so much for this most interesting and most challenging talk.